Good evening guys, I'm Chris and welcome back to this Wednesday's episode of Rift Amps. The Wildcat 40R Bagcat amp is now all back together, all done, given it a good service, checked it all out, back together. Impedance selector now set to 4 ohms to match the cabinet, and it's all good. Now, do you remember I said there was a hum that I was hunting down? We thought it was the switchable cathode bypass caps in the output stage. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't a fault with the amp at all. It was simply, well, when I connected up the reverb tank to check operation of the reverb, the hum disappeared. Disconnect the reverb tank, the hum comes back. So that's all it was, just that the reverb tank was not connected. So yeah, nothing wrong with it. It runs fine. It sounds great. I'm just dreading lifting it onto the flight case to wheel it out the front, because this thing weighs a metric ton. Right, Q&A time. So lots and lots of comments over the past week. So thank you for everyone that tuned in and has put comments down below, asked a question, commented on what's going on. Fantastic. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much. So Rory Loftin said, new subscriber from USA. Welcome. Questions about the deluxe reverb tube swapping to 6L6. What drawbacks might be, if any? Drawbacks doing that, it won't sound like a deluxe reverb anymore. It sounds like a mini or low output Vibrolux reverb instead. Obviously with a 1x12 speaker rather than the 210. So that's something to consider, that it doesn't have that deluxe reverbness, right? It becomes more like well, it does become a low output 6L6 Fender, or like the bigger amps. How much increase in output wattage would you expect? Not much. It still does 22, 23, 24 watts. But you'll notice that the clean tone has a remarkably different feel and shape to it. The bottom end, of course, doesn't do that deluxe reverb flubby thing. Some people love that, some people hate that. So, and of course, the way it then overdrives, because 6L6 is overdrive different to 6V6s, changes things as well. One last question. Can you do the reverse swap from 6L6 to 6V6 with a super reverb? No, absolutely not. You can't. The voltages inside the amp are far too high. You'll quickly burn through 6V6s if you're doing that amp. You would have to put a smaller or a lower voltage power transformer in the amp, but it still need to fit in the hole, so probably a custom wind at that point. Not worth doing. Don't bother. This is the one I mentioned in a previous video. Fender Bassman, of course, just like the ex-Gary Moore one that we've just done. This one, I believe, is ever so slightly earlier. The Gary Moore one was an AB 165. We think this one is an AA 165, so ever so slightly earlier. We'll get inside, we'll confirm all of that anyway, of course. But the customer, cool story in this, bought this blind at an auction. It's a 110 volt model. It doesn't have a speaker cable to connect the head to the cab. He picked it up yesterday and has driven it straight to me, or as quickly as he could, to get this thing tested, because we don't know if there's been any service work done to it. We didn't know what condition it was in. Nothing. He bought this thing blind, and of course the auction house didn't test it either, as far as I know. So yeah, no idea. But yeah, cool. So most of you know what the Bassmans are now. 40 watts, got a bass channel, normal channel. I wonder if this has got the same high frequency oscillation on the bright switch as the Gary Moore one did. We'll find out when we stick it on the scope, but we'll give this thing a visual inspection and go through it. But let's go around the back and have a look. It's in lovely condition, actually. It's got all the piggyback stuff, tilt back legs. It's had a 3-prong conversion already, and looking at the death cap solder point, the cap has been removed as far as I can tell from the outside. This one's serial number A30819. So there we go. All pretty standard. The transformers, as far as I can see, are all original. The output valves have been changed. I think they're groove tubes in there at the moment. We'll look at the preamp valves when we get this thing apart. So yeah, black panel Bassman. You know, you don't see these for a long time, and then two come along almost at the same time. Hippion says, I'm curious as to why you changed the value of the 18k resistor and not the 3.8k in the orange OR120. Well, that resistor, the 18k that was on that schematic, was marked as a 22k. If it was an adjustable fixed bias amp, that resistor would be a potentiometer. So that's the one you adjust to move the bias within, you know, your set range. So that's the first one you do. If I couldn't get the right operating point or bias voltage just by changing that resistor, then I would have then gone to the other one to get the range kind of where I wanted it to be. As to why there was a 3.8k in there over the 1k that's listed on the schematic, a previous tech did this. I don't know why he did that. Maybe that was already an attempt to get the bias somewhere more comfortable. I don't know. I don't know what his thinking was. But first port of call, always adjust the what you might call the tail resistor first, the one that goes to ground. Change the value of that, and then if you can't get it where you need to be, then work your way upstream. Okay, Bassman time. So this one is simply a resurrection and then service as required. So let's get this thing apart. So this one was serial number A30819. And somebody's put a security screw, square, look, on the cable strain relief. Cable strain relief. Now, do I have one of those? I think I do. But where it is, I have no idea. There it is. Neil had one. Square profile. They do have a proper name, but I can't remember. I can't remember what it is. Right. Okay. Back to the Phillips. Before I show you the chassis, there's something weird going on in the cabinet. On the tube chart, he's covered it in some kind of plastic to protect it. That's cool. AA165. It's got AB165 written there, and then the B crossed out and AA165 written below. Okay, chassis. Mains transformer. 15th week. (1967). Choke, 30th week, 1960. Output transformer. Spin it around so we get some light on it. 20th week, 1967. And on the doghouse, we have written recap September the 20th, 2012, GASL. Redone November the 4th, 2012. So 2 months later. 60 microfarad replacing a 10 microfarad. Now, month before day indicates North America, right? So was this last recapped in America? Who knows? But should we get this thing apart and have a look? And we can play our guessing game. Oh. It's raining again, by the way. I know it's nothing like Florida's getting, and I hope if any of you live in Florida or Georgia or South Carolina or any of those states survive the storm, because I've just checked a webcam online and it looks horrendous. There's a live stream of the southernmost point of the Florida Keys, and it looks awful. It looks like the type of storm you see, you know, in a film at the cinema. Anyway, what are we going to see under here? I think it's going to be Sprague's. Haha! So clearly one of the caps exploded at one point. But whoever the tech was, used the Sprague's. Zoom you in. Apart from this one at the end. Was that one missing, and then he had to come back and do it with a different type. I can't see the splitters, but obviously the droppers have been done. Sorry, I should show you. Yeah, these droppers have been done. I can't see because they've used glue. I can't actually see down in between to see the state of the 220Ks, so I don't know. Anyway, the condition of these all look pretty good. I have no concerns so far. So should we get this thing flipped over? Have a look. Where's the feet? Here they are. Let's see what we see inside. Here we go then. It's had work done before. Quite a few changed components. There we go. Got Sprague electrolytics on the board. Well, at least there. Here we haven't. We got something else. Looks like they've used shielded cable. Shielded cable? Shielded wire for the grid wires. Quite a few replaced components across this board, actually. Yeah, and this is not the AB 165 circuit like Gary Moore's amp. This is the earlier style. 1 meg there. Looking through, screen and grid stoppers have been done before. Anode resistors on the phase inverter. See, you lot are learning quite a bit today. The bias diode, sorry, the high voltage diodes have been done. The bias supply cap has been done, and the diode in the bias supply as well. And it looks to have been done to a much higher standard than what we found in the Gary Moore amp. So that's good news. 3-prong conversion. You don't see no death cap. Right. Cool. All good then. I'd be quite happy to fire this one up, at least soft start it, as I showed you in the last video, and see what we get. The only thing I've just noticed, this eyelet is empty. Is that standard, or have they modified this? I need to pull the schematic and layout and have a look. But apart from that, wait, what? Wait, what? This has all been redone. This resonance switch brings in a resistor. Ah, so that's a... Wait, what? Is that now a tone stack lift? Because that's the bass pot, which will go to the... which should have a mid resistor on it. It doesn't. It goes to this switch. This is a modded amp. Oh look, there's a resistor in here as well. Ah, okay, so that's probably a 6K8 in there. And then you've got that either goes straight to ground or it brings in this resistor, which is a 5K6, sorry, which, so that'll be a mid boost. Those pots have been replaced. On this side, work's been done. So someone has been in this and done quite a bit of work over the years. That probably explains this eyelet, doesn't it? Yeah, because we haven't got the huge value capacitor there, which is usually the deep cap. Okay, starting to make sense now. I'm working this out on the fly. It's had quite a lot of work, isn't it? But it might be a good thing. Might sound great. Okay. That's the Bassman. Ian Thacker says, liking the long form video. Sadly, a busy work week deprived me of time to watch it earlier. Absolutely no problem, Ian. I'm certainly not priority for everyone. You watch when you can. I appreciate it all the same. So he says, it was interesting with the Bad Cat. I was wondering why you couldn't just calculate the final bias value knowing the options on resistor values, but had to go back, measure and recalculate. Well, I would always go back, measure and recalculate anyway, because that's just quality controlling your own work, right? So that would always be done. He says, seeing the change in the anode to cathode voltage explained why. Obviously, it's a far more complex interaction in circuit. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, we know that as current decreases, voltage increases within a valve or a tube, and that's, you know, the inverse of that happens as well, or the reverse of that happens. So as current goes one way, voltage goes the other. That's the best way to put it. So, but you're always going to go back and recheck that. You're going to, because of the E12 series of resistors, you can never be bang on to the nearest ohm. You're always at the nearest value, standard value. But you know, often valves, you have to allow for voltage fluctuations in the wall and things like that. So it's not too critical. But in that particular amp, the operating point was so hot that it was no wonder the valves were just cooking themselves all the time. The orange is now all back together and done. So customer can have this back. The cabinet sorted. It's got a new speaker cable and the head. And now all up and running as it should be. So yeah, really happy with this project. Really happy that really honoured that the customer brought it in for me to look at and sort out for him. I have obviously all the documentation that I've worked out, all the measurements, you know, the schematic and stuff I keep on a file. So In the future, I know what's going on with it, and hopefully the customer is going to have a great time playing it. J. Gemmel says, drawing 135 watts at idle for 2 EL34 tubes. That is a hint. Well, I mean, at 240 volts, 135 watts is a smidge over half an amp of wall consumption, which is not uncommon. So, not necessarily an obvious clue, especially for a cathode biased amplifier. So, if that was like the Marshall, a fixed bias amp, I mean, that draws 75, 76 watts at idle, I think. So, yeah, in that case, that would be a big clue. But in a cathode biased amp, you kind of know, you kind of expect more current consumption at the wall because it's pulling more current all the time. Right, Bassman on the bench. I soft started it. I let it sit for roughly 30 minutes. All the voltages inside seemed stable. Everything came up nicely. So far, nothing to be concerned about. However, it's not good. It's not good at all. So, I'm in the normal channel, the guitar channel. Treble and bass on 0, bright switch off. We'll bring up the volume control, and you can see we've got quite an interesting sine wave there, not symmetrical. And we are doing 10.4 volts into 4 ohms. So we'll call it 10.5, puts us at 27.6 watts. Okay, so we're down a little bit. Let's keep watching the scope though. So if I overdrive the amp, that's now volume on 10. Back it down a bit. Not great, but not bad. Okay, I've seen worse. Right. However, bright switch. Let's flick the bright switch up and see what the scope does. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. Off. On. Off. On. Okay, off again. Right. That's just the start of it. So let me just turn the treble up, leaving the bass on 0. Advance the treble. Oh, it's doing weird things. What's going on there? Oh, it's kicking itself. That is making some funky noises. Anyway, bring treble back down to 0. Let's bring up the bass control. Oh. Oh. I mean, I don't even know what that is. Have you ever seen that? Bring up the treble as well, and it just, this thing is absolutely no good. Right, that's just the normal channel. If we make it even worse, this channel, mid whatever off, bring up this volume control. Okay, so we can get to 5 volts output, which is 6 watts. And if I advance the control anymore, it starts to go weird, starts to oscillate. Keep advancing it. I mean, what is that? What is that? All right, back down to there. That's all I can get out of it without it cooking itself. Bring up the treble control. Straight into oscillation. What about the bass control? Yeah. Bass control on 10. Right, so treble and bass back to 0. Advance the volume control just to where it starts to oscillate, back it down. Let's flick the deep switch, which is now a mid boost. Right. This is a classic example of people doing mods to amplifiers because the internet says they should or whatever, and then not checking what it's actually doing on the oscilloscope. So this amplifier, if the customer turned it on, it would have been fine, but when he played it, it would have quickly cooked itself to death, probably taking the output transformer with it. This thing is horrendous. This is going to need quite a bit of remedial work. Thankfully, I don't think it's going to need much. If I put all of this back to stock, I mean, look, these shielded wires are so long. Why? You can do better work than this. So I don't know who the tech was that did any of this. Like I said, the customer bought this blind at an auction, had no idea any of this had been done. But we need to do some serious rectification to get the amp even mildly playable. So I'm going to, I mean, he's given me carte blanche to do whatever I need to get this thing right. So I'm going to demod it, put the circuit back to stock, redo the shielded wires properly and correctly, then we can go from there. But this thing... So what have we learnt from this? Well, the owner has done exactly the right thing. He's brought it straight to a tech, an unknown amp with an unknown history, to get it checked out. Now, I want to know who this guy is. Well, actually, no, I don't want to know who he is, but I want to know whether this guy who did the recap, is the writing the same? Not sure. Anyway, if that guy, it'd be nice to know if that guy is the same guy that did the rest of these mods and this work, because that is appalling. Yeah, whoever that is should not be working on amplifiers. So, or at least if they are, they need to seriously improve their game. So, but that's enough said. It's come to me now. We're going to get this sorted and give this guy a proper working amplifier that isn't going to kill itself. And finally, Max Vockner says, maybe it's on your playlist, but would love to see a race car video. Dabbling amp tech, but a long time wrench turner. Well, as most of you know, I was racing on Saturday back at Silverstone. I tend to do a lot of races at Silverstone because it's just my local circuit. Means there's no overnight trips. You're home soon enough. I'm only 10 minutes away. But yeah, what I'll do in the description of this video, I'll put a link to the video from Sunday's race. You can see how I get on, or you can see what it looks like for those that are interested. Now, unfortunately, the problem that I had at the previous Silverstone round, where the engine lost power on the final lap, returned, which is incredibly frustrating. Because that was a win on the cards back then, and unfortunately, the same thing happened. I qualified in third, and I had worked my way up to first place. Was in the lead, second to last corner. Car did the same thing. So there's something weird going on. Now I had, between the last round and this round, replaced all of the ignition system because it sounded like it was firing on only 2 cylinders and it's a wasted spark system. So I gave the entire ignition system a refresh, and I did find one of the ignition coils was knackered and gone, so or had a weird problem going on with it. So we thought we'd found the issue, but no, it returned. So we are... if it's not spark, it's either air or fuel, and it's not air, so we think it's a fueling issue. We think that the fuel pump itself, the fuel pump sits relatively high above the pickup in the bottom of the tank, and we think when the fuel level gets too low, and it's no longer submerged in fuel, it's overheating, and then that's why it happens at the end of the race when I'm on low fuel rather than at the start or the middle of the race. So, although someone did point out that it would still have fuel flowing through it and cooling it that way, so maybe it's a duty cycle thing and it's not pumping enough fuel at the right time. So, and then overheating and causing problems. So, because it's with race car stuff, unless you go out testing, it's difficult to know if you fixed it until you're back on track. So, all I can do is the worst kind of diagnostics, which is to shotgun replace everything, because I've got no way of testing it between now and the Burkett Relay, which is in 2 weekends' time. So yeah, I'm just going to have to shotgun everything and cross fingers and hope for the best, and run more fuel. Just run more fuel and hope it's not hope the issue doesn't come back. Back working on the 1987 model Marshall, the 4-hole non-master volume 50-watt lead. Finally got my delivery screen resistors, 1K 5 watts, so I've installed those. That's always a good mod to do to protect the valves on an amplifier like this, especially when they're not installed from factory. You should always have some screen stoppers. Anyway, I've just been going through it, checking things out, making sure everything's as it should be. And as you can see on the, hopefully, actually, if I move this, you can see that on this volume pot here, this is the volume for these inputs here. Is it channel 1 or channel 2? Calling it channel 1. You can see that these solder joints have been reflowed at some point, whereas on this pot they've still got the brown checking ink on. So these have been reflowed before. Why? Well, if we look at the schematic for the amplifier, you can see that this input does indeed have a 5 nanofarad capacitor bypassing that volume pot. And in the amplifier, it's not there. So customer wants this to be all present and correct. So let's get that cap back in. Then we can fire it up and then we can see what's going on. Eagle-eyed of you will see that there's not yellow mustards in the tone stack. They've actually got two. For the base cap, they've got two 10 nanofarads in parallel, giving us 20 nanofarad. And in the mid cap position, exactly the same configuration, two 10 nanofarad capacitors in parallel. Which is interesting, really interesting. So these are original, so I'm going to leave those as they are. I've got no reason to touch them for the moment. This amp has had a recap in the past, so I'm just going to add this cap back in, then we're going to fire it up and see where we are. Okay, back on the bench. It's now been up and running for about 30-40 minutes or so right now. It's currently doing 18.8 volts output RMS into 8 ohms, which will put us, call it 1945 watts. So we are not quite there yet, but do you remember last time when we looked at the sine wave, there is a tiny bit of crossover distortion there. In fact, if I come in this way, it's a little bit easier to see. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to mess around with the point where it starts to square off. Now for 50 watts, we're looking at 20 volts. So that's 50 watts right there. But clearly you can see there's some squaring off going on. I'll go to the other channel and it looks the same. So we'll come back to it. There we go. So I'm just going to back this down. To there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the bias pot, this thing here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it colder first to exaggerate that crossover distortion. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial it back in. So okay, so there you go. I've cooled the bias down and you can see it's now more pronounced. We're looking at this lump coming up on this side, coming down on this side, and we're trying to smooth that out. So let's keep adjusting, keep adjusting, keep adjusting. That's looking much better. Sorry, I was looking with my eyes, not with my camera. Back it off a bit. I can see it come back. And there we go. And we're getting 19.5 volts, which is 47.5 watts. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is back to idle. Now I'm going to go in, I'm going to take my bias measurements, and just like the orange amp, this amp does not have 1 ohm resistors on the cathodes, so I'm going to measure the output transformer winding, same as I did on that one, work out the bias, and see where we've ended up. And if we're somewhere in the 50 to 70% range, then I'm going to call this one happy. Okay, I've done the bias measurements. Sorry, I was just re-looking at that sine wave. And this is where we've ended up. So our plate voltage, 423 volts each side. Our screens are about 3 or 4 volts lower on each side. That's why it's important to make sure you've got a screen stopper, because the screens must always be at least a couple of volts lower than the anodes. Of course, when you overdrive the amp, those resistors are going to protect those screens from over dissipating. Our bias voltage applied to grid 1, same on each side, so we know each side of the bias circuit is balanced. We've measured across the output transformer, got 44 milliamps of current running, anode current on one side and 40 on the other. And here's our numbers. So one side we're at 75%, slightly over, and at this side we're at 67.8, so slightly under the maximum. So now, if I tweak it any colder, the amp doesn't run, or it isn't happy. I'm not getting a clean sine wave. I would prefer if these valves were matched more closely. But to be honest with you, in real world application, this is absolutely fine. So I'm quite happy with that. We have got a lovely sine wave. It looks good. All the controls on the amp work. I've given it a play test, and you know what? That harsh metallic edge to the sound that we were getting has now gone. All I've done is added some screen stoppers and fitted the replacement bright cap, which actually for a bright cap is a very large value. I mean, with 5 nanofarad, or 4.7 nanofarad to be precise, 4,700 picofarad. So it's a huge cap, but it's made all the difference. It's brought that channel back to life. I've no idea what was removed in the first place, but yeah. And also, at this moment in time, the 320 microfarad bypass cap on V1A for the normal channel, I'm going to leave it as it is. It sounds great. Got absolutely no complaints with that whatsoever. So yeah, I'm going to leave this soak testing for probably another hour or so. Come back, give it another play test. And then I'll make a decision on whether I want to call this one complete or not. But it's running you know, roughly the right output. It's happy. It's running cooler than it was. The valves are happy. It sounds great. So I have really no concern at the moment. But we'll keep soak testing, see what we can come up with. Well, that's it then, guys. Thank you very much for watching once again. As always, please give this video a thumbs up. All your comments and questions down below. I love reading them all. I love seeing what you guys have got to think about the videos that I'm putting out and all that kind of stuff. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you know when I put out a new video. If you're feeling really generous, why not join the channel for a small fee? And I will catch you all at the next one.